back, guys. In this lecture, we are going to loop over the arrays using one of the array method, which is for each. Okay, so without wasting more time, let's get into it. So if you remember, for looping the arrays, we were using the traditional for loop, right? Or we can say we were using for off loop. So let's see an example of for op loop first. And before that, we have to create an array. So instead of creating an array, I'll pick this one from the previous example. Okay, 5, 6, let's make it till 10, 8, then 9, and then 10. Okay, so now we are going to loop over this array. Const element of arr, and then we simply have to log the elements, right, like this. So if you log with the for off loop, you are getting all the elements one by one, right? So if you want, you can create a nice string with this. Let's say we can create a condition. If the element divisible by 2 gives the remainder of 0, then we have to log the number is an even number. Okay, else we will log it is an odd number. Okay, so now if you check our logs, see here we are getting the number 1 is an odd number, 2 is an even number, 3 is odd, 4 is even, like so. Okay, and let's just quickly comment out this one. Yeah, so now we are getting our nice strings in the console log. So now how we can use, or we can loop over the array with the help of for each methods. So let's have a look. Okay, so we will use the array itself, and then since it is a method, we can access it with the help of dot notation and then for each. And you have to make sure the E is the uppercase. It's not for each all in lowercase, right? So E will be in uppercase. And then since it is a method, we have to call it using the parenthesis, right? Now, this for each function or for each method is a higher order function, we can say. It receives a callback function. As you can see clearly, VS Code itself is suggesting to pass a callback function in it, right? So there are two ways to pass the callback functions. Either you can pass an anonymous function using the function keyword, okay, and then use the curly braces, or you can go ahead with the arrow function using the arrow keyword, like this. Okay, so it's all up to your personal preference which one you like more. Okay, so here I'll go with the callback function or the arrow function. This is just for your reference, okay. Now in the callback function, we have to pass the current element. Since this for each will loop over the array's elements, it will iterate through each element of the array, right? On every iteration, this for each will call this callback function. Okay, so this thing you guys have to keep in mind. The way this for loop works, same way this for each will work, right? So how the for loop works, we pass an array and then on each iteration we get the access of the current element. Let's say in the first iteration we get the access of first element, and then the second iteration we get the access of second element. So likewise in for each, in every iteration in the first iteration, second iteration, third iteration, the for each method calls the callback function. Okay, so it will be something like this, like first iteration, this callback function will be called. Okay, and then the second iteration, again this will be called, and same way third iteration, and so on and so forth. Okay, and now there is one more thing. Okay, so every time when it calls this callback function, it passes some arguments in it. That means we have some parameters available in the callback function. So the parameters available in each iteration are the current element, current elements elements index, and then the complete array which we are looping. That means this array itself, it also get passed on every iteration. Okay, current array which is being iterated. Okay, so for that we can use some parameter variables or some names for the parameters. Let's say for the current element we will use the L as an abbreviation, and then as you can see the VS Code itself started suggesting like the second parameter is the index and then the complete array. Okay, so for the second parameter we can use either I or index, it's all up to you, but you have to make sure this is something related to the index of the element, right? And then in the third parameter you can pass the complete array itself. Okay, so now what we will do, we will first log all these things to see what we are actually getting in it. Okay, so let's log data we are getting in for in each in iteration, let's say in iteration, and then we use the index, and then let's pass the variables current element and the array. So let's pass the array itself, or let's use currarr because I don't want to confuse you guys by using the same variable name for the parameter and the actual array itself. Okay, so now as you can see we already started getting some data here. Let's separate it using some text for each method below. Yeah, so now here we have the for each method data. So just have a close look guys, on every iteration we are getting the current index of the element. Like in the 0th index we have the element number 1, which is this, the value of the first element is 1, and then the complete array itself. Okay, and in same way we are getting at position 1 the value, the current element is 2, and then we are getting the complete array. So this is also one of the basic difference between the for each and the for of loop or a traditional for loop. So in for each we get access to the current element, the current index, and the complete array itself. Okay, so if you remember in one of the previous lectures in previous section, I have showed you a workaround which you can use to access the index in the for of loop, right? And that was something like this: object dot entries, and then here we have to pass our array. So now if you see the logs, here we are getting 0 comma 1 1 comma 2. So what is this? This is the entries which we are getting in the every iteration, right? So entries will contain the first the index of the current element and then the actual element. So to get that, we have to destructure it. In the first position we will get the index, and then in the second position we will get the current element. Okay, so now this one we have to use instead of this L. Okay, so let's replace it quickly. And then I think I have made a mistake somewhere. L is not defined. Okay, here also I have missed it. Yeah, so now if you see the for of loop, we again started getting our logs here properly, right? So now we have the current element as well as the index. So if you want to see what we are getting in the entries, we can comment it for a second and then we can see here index and then the current element. Okay, so here as you can see we are getting the current index of every element and then the current element. So to access the index of current element using the for of loop, we have to do this workaround. But in case of for each, all you need to do is you just have to call that for each method in that array, and then you will get access of the current element, the current index, and then the complete array in case you need to access that array in some scenarios, right? So I hope you guys might have found like this one more interesting than this for of loop. And now here is a question, like you guys again will ask like which one you should use to iterate the arrays. So it's all up to your personal preference. But I want to add one more thing here. As a difference between the for each and the for of loop is, in the for of loop or in traditional for loop, you can use the break statement or continue statement, right? But in case of for each, that is not the case. Here, if you try to use the the continue or break statement, you will simply start getting an error. Let me show you. So let's say I want to use this condition. Okay. So if the current element is divisible by 2, I want to break. Then just have a look what I am getting here. I am getting illegal break statement at line number 114. That means here. So what for each does, it forces you to iterate in every element of the array. Okay. That is why its name itself is for each. It will iterate for each element of the array. You cannot use the break or continue statement in it. But in the traditional for of loop or in this one, this is not the case. Let me show you that quickly. So here if I wanna break after getting the even number, let's use it. Okay. So here if you see, right after getting an even number, my iteration got break completely. Okay. If I use continue, then it will simply skip all the even numbers, right? It will give me all the odd numbers. Okay, so as soon as I got one even number, it printed the log and then it started skipping the even numbers. Okay, or I think I have to continue it before logging it because I'm still getting the logs. Okay, so this way we will get only the odd numbers. As you can see, we are getting the odd numbers. So this is also one of the basic difference between the traditional for of loop and the for each method. And as you can see, this one is also way cleaner than this traditional for of loop, right? And accessing index and everything is also quite complex in the traditional for of loop in comparison to the for each method. And why I'm telling you all this, because in the future lectures we are going to study the same terminology. Like we are going to study some more methods related to the arrays which will use the same signature. That means they will accept some callback functions. So it's better to understand everything here in this lecture itself, so you won't face any problem in the future lectures, okay, related to the array methods. So if you guys found this one a little complex lecture, then you guys can obviously rewatch it, or what you can do, like you can practice it a little bit, because by doing some practice you will get familiar with these methods of the arrays. Because in industry we use these sort of methods a lot, okay. We basically chain the methods, and then we do the operations in one go, in the array or whatever we want, in whatever data structure we want, okay. So yeah guys, this is it for this lecture. In the next lecture we are going to see like how we can use the for each method in the sets and the maps data structures, okay. So in this one we have seen how we can use for each in the arrays. In next lecture, let's see how it works for the sets and maps. So see you there.